Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion, Resisting Extractivism, that will not only be streamed as part of the online festival Latitude, organized by the Goethe-Institut, but also broadcasted as a radio program titled Latitude on Air, Unsettling Power Relations, in cooperation with Reboot FM and the Radio Netzwerk Berlin, co-curated by Diana McCarty and Elena Agudio. My own name is Lotte Arndt. I'm a Paris-based writer and curator and currently involved in On Trade Off, a collaborative artistic project on extractivism between the DRC and Belgium, and I will moderate the discussion today. This panel, to give you a short introduction, will focus on the works of two artists who have repeatedly and extensively dedicated themselves to the history and present of extractivism. Rachel O'Reilly, an artist, writer, curator, and PhD researcher at Goldsmith Center for Research Architecture, working between Australia and Europe, but traveling, teaching, and exhibiting worldwide, at least before the lockdown. Rachel finished in 2019 a feature-length film titled Infractions, which is the final work of the larger project, The Gas Imaginary, in which she is invested since 2013. A project that addresses the rollout of new forms of gas extraction in Australia across different media. And Sammy Baloji, who spends his year in Rome, but usually lives and works between Brussels and Lubumbashi in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Since the early 2000s, Sammy has worked in many ways about colonial mining and its aftermath in the Katanga region, and we will discuss several of his works over the next hour. Later in the conversation, we will be joined by curator Elena Agudio, artistic co-director at Savvy Contemporary in Berlin. A very warm welcome to the three of you. When referring to extractivism, we are speaking about the structural foundations of global capitalism and its colonial history. To quote Heather Davis from a recent issue of the journal After All, we are speaking about and here I quote, understanding that the world, its beings, are inherently commodifiable, violently turned into things, operating as a standing reserve for the accumulation of profit and power in the hands of a few. In the past years, extractivism has been theorized mainly in Latin American scholarship to describe, and I quote again, describe the mutual entwinements of colonialism, capitalism, and ecocide, unquote. But evidently, it reaches back far longer as an economic and social system. Global capitalism is fueled by fossil energies, which are most often extracted for the economic benefit of transnational companies collaborating with national governments to the detriment of local populations. The asymmetrical structures of the world economy have been built on colonial foundations and continuously present the frame in which the availability of strategic raw materials is assured by impoverishing and oppressing the inhabitants of the land. For us today, the current lockdown in many parts of the world presents a particularly double-sided situation for our discussion. Rachel is joining us from Australia, Sammy is in Italy, Elena in Berlin, myself in Western France, and the recording studios are in Germany. In the initial plan for this festival, we would have all gathered in Berlin, flying in from locations all over the world. Now we meet via a screen, and what appeared over the last couple of weeks as a frightening world of a massively extended internet-based communication and caused a lot of excited comments about the sudden decrease of international travel with its destructive ecological footprint, is also based on energy and raw material consuming technologies and their ongoing supply. So even in the so-called dematerialized communication, we are taking part in a system that extracts labor from bodies, minerals, gas, and oil from the ground, and that has no inherent limits or realms that it would not include in the permanent accumulation process, as Karl Marx wrote as early as 1884 in The Capital. And it is precisely this double-sidedness of analytical critique of extractivism in your artworks and our own implication in the asymmetries of the global economy that we would like to discuss today. And with this, I will stop my introduction and rather hand over to Rachel O'Reilly as a first speaker who will introduce her work and more precisely her film Infractions, of which we will see and hear a short extract in a bit. For a start, I would notably like to hear you about the specific form of extractivism which is described in the film and about the context in which fracking takes place in Australia.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just talk through a bit of the kind of geo-biographical intimacy of some of these kind of bigger concepts as it relates to this particular industry. So I started paying attention to the unconventional gas industry, which, you know, is colloquially called fracking, in about 2011. But the industry was approved. It came out of the United States context, and it was embraced in particular following the first oil shock in 1973. There was a lot of experimentation and expansions in the US before it was approved for Australia in 2009. And that was just 2 years after a major takeover of Indigenous lands in the Northern Territory. The first processing plant was set up through the East Coast port where I grew up, called Gladstone, which is unceded Gureng land. And the city, as a kind of colonial port city, is a key site in the Venn diagram of corporate power's relationship both to Aboriginal and labour rights in Australia. My family on my father's side were self-educated union organisers, so I knew that history through them. And I was working in my day job, obviously, in art. And at that time, I was a moving image curator, setting up the Australian Cinematheque and curating a lot of Indigenous art and film at that time. So as it happened, there was a mass, with the port expansion, there was a mass fish kill event, which coincided with the beginning of the rig, the fracking rig rollouts in the countryside much closer to my museum, and the rivers started leaking methane and were actually flammable. You could light the rivers on fire, as you can see in the US context. The project's approvals were extremely light on detail. If you wanted to research them, there was hardly any investigative journalism at all, particularly around my hometown, because there was very little resistance to it. For the first 4 years, I was paying attention to this because obviously the connection of my workplace to my hometown, to the settler colonial situation, was completely obvious. And I was freelancing after this period while the sponsorship continued. And essentially not a single First Nations person was making it into the campaign videos of the biggest environmental resistance movement of the neoliberal era in Australia at that time. It was more than 4 years until First Nations people were interviewed about the so-called corporate invasion of Australia, when, you know, in a context where the entire country has been a corporate invasion for 250 years. I was trying to write about the situation, given that I knew so many, you know, fishermen and workers affected by it. But essentially there was no information to be mediated in the early days. And as an installation curator, I started thinking about this process and this kind of the scale of the transformation of the countryside as an installation drama. And I started thinking about how you could use a different kind of artistic media to at least dramatize what was taking place in terms of the powers and forces in play, if no kind of numerical figures were available to kind of document the destruction, but also, to put people in dialogue who are differently affected by the infrastructure and by the installation, who weren't necessarily in conversation with people in the whiteness of the environment movement. So that was ongoing research. I made drawings, I made poetry, I made an animation on the history of the racist land law that was used to colonize the country, because a lot of, that's just not taught in Australian schools and the education system. And so, teaching against the whiteness of a successful resistance movement at the same time as frontlining Indigenous voices in the spaces where, the corporations were colonizing farming land, I thought was something that I could contribute to the story. Essentially, the moment that I was offered the KW Production Series Commission in Berlin, just before that, the Australian government, the Northern Territory government, lifted a moratorium on shale gas there, and that is the state with the most Indigenous communities on their country, and many have actually won back their land in that area because of the fact that in previous decades, the state didn't think it wanted to necessarily develop those territories, and now it has decided that it wants to. And so a lot of the, I could see that the same process that I'd, studied for 4 or 5 years at that point was about to begin in the Northern Territory. And I assumed that I could contribute something in connecting the different literacy and this different new engineering technology on the ground, in places where English is often the 4th or 5th language of First Nations people. And also connecting the legal geographies, not just between 2 states in Australia, but actually, the globality of the industry, the fact that Europe is expanding, importing infrastructure for gas from the settler colonies, from the US, possibly from Australia. And gas continues to be marketed as a transition fuel, even though we know, it is as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than coal in creating global warming. And there has been a kind of slow move to kind of teach the reality of LNG, the damage of liquid natural gas expansions in the context of climate change movements. So, I could play actually a sequence from Infractions that is actually an interview with a man called Jack Green. Jack's a Garawa and Gurindji man. He's a major activist and important elder in the Gulf country of Borroloola, which has a very strong resistance history. Amazing artists and songwriters and reggae musicians from that country. And he started painting in his, oldie, he's about in his maybe the last 10 years in reaction to a previous set of mining contaminations from a nickel mine that is near his country, on his country. But what happens once the industry hits the territory is it's hitting these hubs of resistance that are extremely literate in the damage that mining does. And so, invasion by mining companies is not new to my Indigenous colleagues, but the power of their resistance comes from their remediation of past and present mining struggles, also through different kinds of artistic media. So we'll just play a sequence from Infractions that features Jack Green.
The land they gave us back is not a really good land. It's a land that they don't want to know, but that's the land we got back. And we're proud of it because that land it's not important to pastoralists or the government, but it's sort of special to us, that's where I think the government and mining company, I don't think they realize how important this land is for Aboriginal people. And what's in the back of their mind, they keep worrying about money, 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 so dig the land up, destroy the land. And that's also fracking doing the same thing. They can never tell us what damage can happen down the bottom. They said it's pretty safe. They put a big pipe there, and they say they only frack it a little bit like that, and then saying they put sand for just to keep it open so that gas can come out and all that sort of thing. But to us inside Aboriginal people, we still don't trust. I asked them the question. I said, well, look, what if earthquake, because this land, Mother Nature will give up somewhere on us, and damage a lot of things. And they told us that never going to happen. It's pretty safe and everything. Flexible cement, flexible pipe and things like that they're going to put down, but no one knows how long that pipe going to be any good, So when he's down there for good until he get eaten up by the heat or salt or something inside it. Yeah, and I done a painting on the mines, right? I done quite a few paintings on the mine where they come in, dig up the land and take all of mineral away. And then one of the painting mine is the company sitting up on top of it, hey, hi, I'm going with your bloody mineral or something, So that's one of my paintings. Other one, I done a painting on roots of a tree. So how they get to Aboriginal people, they find one person, and to myself, I don't think that person is understand what they're doing properly. They use that person. That's why I always say that they come in on end of that root to the tree. I call them white ants. When they get in there, they start eating towards that trunk. So that as soon as they can get in there, they'll get into the rest of our group, and start saying, this company, good, look what he's doing. He's giving you this, look what government doing. He's giving you this, he's giving you that, That's the reason I've done that painting.
So when did you start painting about mining companies?
Well, as soon as that McArthur River mine, as soon as the diversion of the river, that's when I started doing all this painting towards this. You'll see another my painting, I done a fly in and fly out, And the reason I done that is because every time government comes in, they'll fly in, spend about an hour or something, or half an hour, a couple of hours, and then they drive around, look around, jump back on the plane and take off. And you don't give us enough time to answer that question, or, you don't give us time to, I don't know, to think a bit more what we got to say, But
Yeah, so that was a sequence of the film in which Jack Green is sitting on his homelands in Gulf country, Baralula, and he's we drove around looking at the country that might be affected if by new gas infrastructure if it comes to his country. They've been quite successful in Baralula. They were actually the first Aboriginal community to use their own counter-administration practices to declare their land frack-free by interviewing everyone in the community and getting signatures, against the industry. And they're working across the country with First Nations communities and also with environmental NGOs very successfully to kind of strengthen the movement, including intersectionally. I think, how much time do I have left? I think I could possibly stop there and we could, move into I'm happy to answer any questions that come up from that kind of intro.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'm really impressed by Jack Green speaking and by the depth of the history of the land that he is living on, and the way how he describes the different strategies by mining companies to actually go into that land and to take over the rights, and with this to take away the possibilities to live, to inhabit this land with all the practices that are attached to this presence. And with this, I would like to jump and to make the first connection to Sammy's work. And I was notably thinking of the way, because there's like in this narrative, there's this big presence of history that is tied to a land, and that is present in the materiality of the land itself. And this is something, Sammy, that I think is very present throughout your work, that like working about the mining history of Lubumbashi and the Katanga region, that there is a kind of time structure that keeps coming back, where you are pointing to the colonial exploitation of the soil, just to find the continuities in the present. And so that in very many of the forms that extractivism takes today in northern Congo, northern eastern Congo, there is a permanent recurrence or permanent pre-structuring by the colonial history and its presence in the territory. And so when we're preparing this discussion, we were talking about specifically, because this is very present in all your work, about a photo series called Kolwezi that you did between 2011 2012. That works with strongly contrasted views of landscapes. So it's one hand landscapes that are intensively marked by huge craters and washed out extractive infrastructure, and these are contrasted with idealized representations where the hardships of embodied or that are embodied in these damaged mine areas are totally absent and invisible. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit, this series has a name of a city, a mining city called Kolwezi, and I would like you to comment a little bit on this connection of your work relating to the history of this place.
Yeah, thank you, Lotte. I think I found a lot of connection while I was watching the film that Rachel showed. Talking about Congo or all those mining areas in Africa, I think it's really connected to the colonial construction that started since 1885 with the Conference de Berlin. So, and whenever we start to talk about extractivism, it's always about how the occupation implied a certain way of structuring those cities, those areas, those places by, with, I would say, with religion or even administration that in a way tends to create a hierarchy between people or races and also indigenous people who are living there. So from, I would say that after the Conference de Berlin, the city, I mean, the Katanga region, which is in the Copper Belt region in the south of Katanga, south of Africa. Lubumbashi was created in 1910 as a city, and the city was really built around the extraction purpose, because it was the place where you can still found even actually the copper or cobalt, but even uranium that was used, for example, for the first atomic bomb came from the Katanga region. And this reality also was quite important and for the Belgian, but even for the United States. It was also kind of more interesting for Americans, even after the independence in '60 that happened. The thing was, Congo was still more important in order to kind of just because of the mining resources, it was important to keep Congo under the control of the United States during the Cold War. I mean, because of the Cold War, the United States wanted to have control of those mineral resources from 60 onward until the end of the Cold War in what happened in 1990. And this is what, so like from 1960 to 1990, we went through a kind of dictatorial regime with who was a president in a way, was trying to kind of keep a distance with the colonial history or the colonial legacy in a way by at the same time imposing his own rule on the population. So I would say that I was born during this dictatorial regime with, just as Rachel said, I went to school, but the colonial history has never been told to us in terms of how the land was occupied and how the structure, the pre-colonial structure, was in a way destroyed by this extraction purpose imposed by the colonial system, but even by the church. And myself, I was living in a city where I couldn't understand where it's what was the purpose of the city, except of the fact that all the people and all the target was to go to the mining and to extract and to benefit from these mineral resources. So I started to really question myself and also kind of trying to understand how the city was built and what was the purpose behind by using archival materials that I found it in the mining area, which was abandoned after the crisis period, what happened from 90 to 2004. So,
Sammy, thank you very much. I'm super sorry to have to cut you right now. This is quite hard, but we will come back to the context that you just introduced in the second part of the question in a couple of minutes. Just very sorry to jump in like that, but we have a restricted time frame, and maybe I can try at that moment to make a connection again between your two works and notably the way how you work. Like you just spoke, Sammy, about the archives with which you work, with the visual material that you're using for the montage, for these juxtapositions that you're often creating in your notably photographic work, but not only. And I wanted to come back in this second round of questions to the way how you work as artists. In the, whether like the aesthetic strategies, but also the ways to organize your alliances with local populations when you're working on extractivism. And I was very impressed, or it's very present in the film of Rachel, to see that throughout the film there's a strong, the film relies on a strong guidance and insights of the interview partners that you're finding. All of them are activists, some are themselves artists. We just heard it in the position of Jack Green. And one of them, Q Kenny, is literally driving you on a bumpy road through the journey of the film. And leading you to a couple of sites of land, like extraction and land dispossession. And then you're bringing in the image, as we could see in the extract, that the sequence that you've shown, additional information. And so you're coupling the voices of the people who are working with you with information which is not visible to an untrained eye. And maybe you can give us a short idea of this type of collaborations, and so of the also activist use of the art field in the way you're working with your interview partners?
Sure, I'll try to be brief. I mean, a lot of the work before this film had a lot of conversations behind the scenes with activists who were, happy for me to be producing more kind of analytical pieces, I guess, for public spaces. I used more of the artist talks to talk more candidly about the activism, but there's not, in Australia, there's not a lot of crossover between the environmental activists or movement in museums and the general kind of public of museums. There's a lot of reasons for that, but generally when I presented this work in the early days in Australian institutions, people really had no idea what I was talking about, even when it was only an hour's drive away. I think also, also in Europe, when I moved there 10 years ago, and definitely, the newness of this very particular industry has taken a while to travel. But in terms of the collaborations, I don't say that I'm an activist. I think I'm interested in art's responsibility to attend to social movements and to do certain kinds of research that social movements don't have time to do necessarily. Obviously in the settler colonial context, there's I think we discussed a little bit before this segment what was involved in my decision to kind of stop curating artworks and start making artistic work about the current absolutely neo-colonial energy sector. That was a particular decision that still keeps me in, art is the space in which I professionalized and I hope to make work professionally. But at the same time, the dominant mode of production can be quite extractive. And obviously I try to, assume a project of reciprocity and, need in the work that I do. So the activists that are in the film I met most of them at a really amazing regional art event called Stories from the Front Line, in which a lot of those Indigenous artists and songwriters and activists were speaking. And that event was organised to talk about the possibility to use art for the anti-fracking movement. And so I was invited based on the fact that I'd already been making anti-fracking art for a different place. But just because, a white filmmaker wants to make a film about an urgent issue, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to contribute anything to the mediation of that issue. So, I learned a lot from the people that I interviewed. They made a lot of editing decisions about the material that we shot. They approved the final take. They took things out of the final film. They wanted certain things emphasised in the final film. And then I made a particular decision to put a really important Indigenous legal theorist in the film to frame the film, precisely because of how I think racism is a job creator. I think for white artists to a certain extent, like obviously an injustice can create an urge to do something. And you're often kind of the least knowledgeable person to be doing something about that person's land. And so I think it's quite a modest film in the way that it's just connecting people, who don't have a camera on hand necessarily to travel that far and connect those stories. But the activistic part, I think, is more about letting those people remediating the conflicts in their country. And using art space to talk about, the absolute contemporaneity of those struggles in the context of, a conversation that's supposed to be about contemporary art.
Thank you so much. I will take up the thread and take it back to Sammy and take it back to the situation, how quite often in your work you're bringing in or showing the voices or the agents who in the context of Lubumbashi are dealing with the situation of mining and are trying to resist the situation of mining. And right now, I would like you to invite to introduce and to comment on a film that you've produced in 2017, titled Tales of the Copper Cross Garden, which is actually shot inside a huge industrial foundry and gives a very different idea of what mining is about than all the work that you've done in the artisanal mining sites. So in the sites where people are themselves extracting or trying to make a living with their own hands. And I would like to hear you how you connect these images of this machinery, this heavy machinery, with the way how it is intertwined with colonial domination in ideology.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a structure in the film. So in a way, Tales of the Copper Cross Garden, episode 1, interweaves three narrative elements that are in constant tension throughout the 42-minute film. These are written extracts from the autobiographical essay of the Congolese philosopher Valentin Mudimbe, entitled Les corps glorieux des mots et des êtres, esquisse d'un jardin africain à la Bénédictin, published in 1994.
I jump in. I have the English translation is Singers of the Copper Cross. For the choir and for Mudimbe, the title is The Glorious Bodies of Words and Beings, Sketch of a Benedictine Garden. This may be useful.
Mm-hmm. So in this work, Mudimbe analyzes through his life experience and his journey the impact of the Catholic Church and the colonial power in the assertion of indigenous bodies and colonized territories in the Congo. So from this analysis emerges reflections on theory and on post-colonial Africa. The film is accompanied by the liturgical songs of the chorale de Petits Chanteurs à la Croix de Cuivre, the set of songs which constitute the identity of the Katanga Mess, recorded in 1948. Is composed and accompanied on the organ by the Congolese composer Joseph Willet under the direction of the Belgian religious authorities. The contemporary images are taken in a workshop where copper is transformed into conducting cables. One can observe the production choreography performed by the workers in a very precarious safety condition with machinery dating from the colonial period. The film bears witness to the colonial legacy, both in the capitalist production process, where the body undergoes and does not reflect, and in the subjugation of mind by religion. So I think I can come after that to talk a bit more about the film.
That's great. Can we see the sequence of the film, please? Oh.
Oh, what
Sorry.
happened?
I wasn't yeah, I wasn't sure if there was a technical problem or not, but actually it's the end of the film. Sammy, do you want to say a couple of words more on this association? Yeah, as you've said in the introduction, that
Yeah.
in the film you have these workers, you have the text by the philosopher Valentin Yves Modimbe.
Actually, it didn't appear, the text, so I was waiting also this part, just in order to introduce all the three parts that I was talking about. So, to talk about the theme, I think for me it's important to have a local voice, because it's all about the experience also of the space beyond the structure that has been imposed through religion or administrative roles that in a way tends to kind of put the people on a position of production without thinking. So for me, the theme the way, that's why also I choose to have the local voice, which actually is from this philosopher Mudimbe, who was trained as a priest and was taken from his family when he was 7 years old. And he went to a missionary school where he learned theory about how to become a Christian and a priest. And then after that, he left this place and started to kind of analyze what happened in those territories and how the religion played a strong role into the domination of local minds and bodies. So, and one other thing is that the songs that is part of the film are in part proper to the local region in order to kind of create a local identity, and that's why Katanga Mess. So it's been a sort of commission that was given to one of the composers, actually Joseph Kiwele, who was trained, he's a local singer and composer who was trained by the Belgian missionaries. So he, in a way, wrote and composed the songs for the local church. So in that way, people from Katanga could feel more close to the religion because the composer was a black one. And in that way, they could reappropriate actually the Christian religion into local culture in a way. And on the other hand, so you have this workshop where they're trying to merge normally the copper and transforming it into a cable, which is also a way getting the mineral resources in order to give it a shape that the society wanted to look like or to be useful for the society itself. But the society, at the same time, is a capitalistic one, which is about producing but not benefiting from it, because all those products goes out of the country, and when they come back, no one locally can afford to get access to it. So those layers are more interesting for me in order to build a sort of tension in a way of experiencing those spaces today.
Yeah, and they very importantly call our attention to the fact that extractivism is also related to an ideological program, that this is not only about raw material extraction, but it is also a worldview that is actually going with us and coming with us and allowing this domination. And you show very precisely the modes of resistance that are existing in that. Rachel has already pointed to the different, like, contradictory or difficulties to navigate this this field that is so much structured by heavy power structures. And actually the radio program that we are participating in has this in its subtitle, and so this is maybe where I would like to make the connections. It's called Unsettling Power Relations. And here is a moment where I would like Elena Agudio to join us. I've already introduced her in the beginning of the program as the artistic co-director of Savvy, and I just wanted to point rapidly to one exhibition that she has curated, titled "Soil is an Inscribed Body on Sovereignty and Agropoetics," and I thought it was particularly related to the questions that we are discussing right here. What for us in the preparation was important, like exchanging with Elena, was to bring in a kind of self-reflexive dimension to this conversation, to think about how our practice in the art field is itself part of asymmetrical power relations and patronage structures, how we are complicit in these structures, and how we can actually contribute to substantial infrastructural change. And with this, I hand over to Elena, who will guide us through the last part of the conversation.
Yes, thank you for inviting me in, and I'm very happy to see Sammy and to see Rachel as well. So let's try to make more a speculative exercise after this reasoning about extraction and in its materiality. So I'm very pleased to join this conversation and also to elaborate on some of this, some of the nodes and knots of the today program, because we are now doing one event that is unfolding within the day and within the 4 days festival. And this particular focus on extraction is for me interesting, because I would like to, together with you, but also later with the other guests in the radio especially, to elaborate on the possibility of sharing tactics and strategies to unsettle these power relations and power dynamics. So thank you, Lotte, for already articulating these thoughts, and thanks to Sammy and Rachel for your reflections. Especially thank you for sharing the political reasoning that is behind your artistic work. In fact, I would like to continue in this direction, and in this second and last part of the discussion, I'd like to push our reasoning a little bit further and to open a reflection on power structures and relations of collaboration also within infrastructures. So I'd like, in fact, us to elaborate on the role of cultural institutions and cultural workers, especially the ones in the global north or in the position of privilege in context of secular colonialism, to unveil what feminist and subaltern theorist Silvia Rivera Cusicanchi calls a political economy of knowledge. She refers to that by pointing to the strategical appropriation of discourses elaborated by Global South scholars in the institutions of the Global North. And she contends that this political economy of knowledge involves new forms of colonial domination through also salaries, privileges, scholarships, degrees, and citation practices, and especially by producing the illusion of multiculturalism and diversity within academia and institutional context. So I invite us in this very few minutes to address this trap and reflect together on the danger of neutralizing practices of resistance, and to do something that we could understand more as a self-reflexive exercise, analyzing the way in which we, on one side, are complicit in these asymmetrical games, and on the other side, the way in which we engage with the strategies that activists and scholars, collectives are elaborating to undo these geometries and performing and claiming back their sovereignty. So this is, of course, an exercise that I also myself obviously very often do as a European white woman working in a context like savvy contemporary, but in general interested in the possibility of challenging the racially structures of the society that we inhabit and build. So to end, I would like to again reflect a second on what Silvia Rivera Cusicanchi says, and I'm quoting her. I could also mention other people, but I think here her positions are some of the most radical ones. Yeah, I was saying I want to point to the fact that she warns us about the risk of the NGOization of our world, pointing to this new form of colonial extraction that is as dangerous as the material dispossession. So in this position right now, I think we could allow ourselves to the questioning of this critical exercise that we are performing within an institutional context, virtual in this moment, but it is. And to do so, I want to bring to our virtual table some words by the late Okwi Embezor that actually we took as inspiration for the initial curatorial planning of this festival and for the radio programming over the coming years. In an interview that was published in the Journal of the Kulturstiftung des Bundes, he was mentioning and writing, "I do, however, worry very much about the consequences of good intentions." And Vezor was pondering the asymmetric engagement between North and South and drawing thoughts about the practice of institutions that intend to support the development of non-Western economies, culture, and art. And he was questioning whether their projects should not be understood as project of patronage rather than project of exchange, and promoting an interrogation of what he was calling the paradigm of developmentalism, or this tribute economy in which people receiving support are expected to contribute and respond with gratitude. This is, of course, quite a big trap, and we know that notion of development has been used and are still used as a tool of othering and a tool of ordering. So, following these cogitations, I'd like, if we can, in, 7 minutes, elaborate briefly on the role of public institutions and cultural workers as well, and reflect on the infrastructural disproportion that they and we navigate and produce, and to ask, first of all, how complicit we are in this asymmetrical game. What are the strategies that artists and militants are using to weaponize and work out these asymmetries to produce productive struggles and to avoid the trap of instrumentalization and patronage, and especially to what extent we, with our different positionalities, even in this panel, we have very different positionalities. How can we, and if we can together, formulate tactics to exercise this substantial infrastructural change? I think both Rachel and Sammy are in many ways already reflecting a lot on these conundrums in their work. And Rachel is doing that by navigating curatorial strategies in a secular colonial context, while Sammy, with Picha, not only as an artist, but also as the agitator, the main agitator behind Picha, the biennial, but Picha also the institution, an institution that is autonomous, that tries to be a completely autonomous structure and to recenter processes in Congo to counter this extractivist way, could also absolutely say something about this reasoning. So maybe Rachel starts or Sammy. Who has the mic on?
Right, I think Rachel for a quick.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, yeah, I'll just say one sentence and then hand over to Sammy because I think he's doing a lot more work in his local context. But I mean, my immediate reaction to that would be, you know, definitely the art industry has been sold mining as a development opportunity for regions that they often, you know, never visit and don't access the story of. And I think it's very easy to generalize about how extractive our cultural industry is because, you know, we live under capitalism. But I think, you know, every institution of it has a different history and a different kind of mode of production. And I think you just have to be extremely relational and for every single event in terms of the decisions that you make with this, often with the same film, with the same people, you know, with the same, with different localities. And so, yeah, I just think, you know, that the struggle continues. Yeah, it's very, very difficult to generalize, but I think, you know, trying to avoid all repetitions of violence, do harm minimization, and only work with good people is, you know, the way that we deal with it, I think.
On my side, and talking about Lubumbashi, I think it's really different because, I mean, it's a space really for extraction and exploitation, as it's been said all during our session. But what I would like to say is that for us, it's really important to be in community because voices are not listened by the government. We don't have structures, we don't have institutions in those areas where, as I said, we've been through a dictatorial regime without questioning the history. There's kind of social and if you want to exist in those spaces, you need also to be in sort of community. So picture, it's also that in terms of you can't live as an artist by yourself without having also a community around you with whom you can start to make sense and also having dialogue. And that's why we started also Feature to create this panel where it's not only for local, but it's also more being in contact with other artists, art historian or intellectual or activists who are in other spaces also questioning the capitalist way, but even the cultural field, how it works in a way. So this is why I think for us it's more, I would say more about existing than revendicating something more than that. Through our culture, through our experiences, and this reality in a way.
And I think, if I may, so one of these really important gestures that Picha is creating and that is not finishing, but like continuously produces so many very fruitful relationships is to bring resources back to Lubumbashi and like create, as you say, these communities that collaborate and that by sharing are actually turning this extractivist logic around, at least for the way to work, and very often appropriate what institutions in the North are proposing to you, and like rather bringing this back or handing it over to to the structures that you're creating in Lubumbashi. Elena, do you want to have the final word in this conversation?
I think this, as Rachel said, is really a common struggle, and it's a problem that we all have to address. Again, I want to stress with very different positionalities, and it's just by doing it day by day in our own practice and by the way we are engaging with these problems. But I think the important thing is always to be aware of this exercise of self-reflection that especially us cultural workers in the global north and institutions in the global north have to consider always fundamental.
This, I think, was a very good last word, and I hope that our conversation won't stop, but take this moment of public exchange only as a starting point to continue to exchange and hopefully to collaborate. Thank you so much for participating in this very quick time slot, and have a really nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao, thank you.